2, 1. Now the live button is there, so we're ready to go. So let me introduce you folks to Dr. Shelley Murphy, and her presentation tonight is called Timelines. You gotta do one. Is that right? You gotta do one. Timelines are a critical strategy that most genealogists and the family historians do not use. Why is that? Is it too time consuming? Excuse me? Did somebody read something? I'm sorry. Okay. Is it too time consuming, or the lack of knowledge on how to set one up? This webinar will provide an overview and challenge you about the benefits of timelines by taking you step by step on how to set up a timeline and use it to further your genealogy research. Shelley Murphy is a native of Michigan, residing in Central Virginia, and has been an avid genealogist for 25 plus years. She's a coordinator and faculty for the Midwest African American Genealogy Institute, and presents genealogy workshops at the local, state, and national genealogical conferences. Her blog, which you all should subscribe to, is familytreegirl.com. Pretty easy to remember, familytreegirl.com, and has publications with the Central Virginia Heritage, a publication of the Central Virginia Genealogical Association. She holds memberships with NPG, APG, AA, HGS, and is the member chair for the DAR Jack Jewett chapter in Charlottesville. And we're going to invite her to join Western Mass Genealogical, aren't we, Shelley?
Yes, actually, I will join because I have some ancestors there.
Okay, I'm going to shut off the mic and I'm going to turn the whole thing over to you. You're on a nice big loudspeaker and everybody should be able to hear.
Okay, thank you and welcome everyone. First thing I want to get question I want to ask you is, do you know who Jack Jewett is?
No.
Oh my. Jack Jewett, which is the name of the DAR chapter I belong to, is called the Paul Revere of the South. The British were coming to get Governor Jefferson at one time and some other, aristocrats and things. And Jack Jewett rode his horse 40-some miles to warn Governor Thomas Jefferson that the British were coming. And so they call him the Paul Revere of the South, comparing him to Paul Revere. Little tidbit. So, moving along. Did they get their handouts, Dave?
They have their handouts.
Okay. Those are just some handouts I typically share. I don't know everyone's level of research, so there's things for new people and experience. So I'm going to go ahead and get started. And again, I want to thank you all for inviting me for this. My goal, which you can change the slide, Dave, for tonight is really to get everyone, let's see, how do I want to say that? Want to get everybody on the same page. So my goal is to provide support and also give validation to those that do use a timeline. I also want to be able to motivate people. There you go. Motivate folks that aren't using a timeline to be able to use one. I'll give a brief overview about using a timeline. Then we'll go through some of the categories on the timeline chart. And then we'll talk about so what, which is an analysis, being able to do an analysis. And we'll look at a little piece of a death certificate and some more. Okay, you can change that one. So I'm going to run through some basics again. I'm sure a lot of you have heard this, but it's nice to reinforce it. We want to make sure that people know the basics of genealogical research. We want to know about what laws that were in place at the time that you're researching your ancestor. Learn about the records and resources that are available, and we definitely want to know about the community. And a lot of these things you're going to hear me repeat again. So just bear with me. It's all for a purpose. I want to make sure we're all on the same page. So one of the first things I think about is that people need to be organized. Next. Getting organized. You got to have some type of a system for what comes in and what goes out, or how you're going to retrieve documents. I always recommend that people get a couple books and use them as resource guides. And you always want to start with what you know, ask questions about what you don't know, And you also got to figure out who or what, as in another document or a resource, that might know what you don't know. Over the years, you always hear people talking about jumping outside of the box. Well, I want you to stay in that box and keep digging and researching instead of stepping out. We know there's no magic in genealogy. It is really turning the pages, you know, basically day by day in order to have an outcome of documenting our family's history. You're going to have challenges. You can recognize that and know that some people you might not find. And this is true. It doesn't matter if you're researching European ancestry or if it's African American ancestry. Next. One of the first things I'd like to share that I got permission to use from the California Genealogical Society, and this is something we talk about quite a lot at MAGI, which is the Midwest African American Institute, is that not everything can be done online. And as you can see in this fabulous description here, this iceberg, most of that research is going to be done in the libraries, the courthouse, the archives, and actually it could be right in a cemetery as well. So I love this flyer that they had, and so I talked to them about being able to share it. But it really gives the picture, because we have so much technology right now and so many people are pulling things off a line from Ancestry, Family Search, you know, newspapers.com, and etc. We just want to make sure that real research is actually going to happen typically in those courthouses and archives and libraries. I also see that librarians are an untapped source that genealogists and family historians should take advantage of. Next. So more routine genealogy, again, set a goal. What are you looking for? Determine what records and resources are needed. Gather those records, place that information into a timeline, and hopefully you're going to be able to question what you put in there. If something doesn't seem right or dates don't coincide like they should, you're going to review what's in there and determine what's your next step. And you want to always summarize whatever you're working on and write it up and be able to share that story. Because remember, we really don't do this for us. We're actually doing it for the family or for others in the family to be able to tell that story. Next. It is a necessary tool. Dave mentioned a couple reasons that I think that genealogists do not use timelines. They really don't see that it's a benefit, and it's just another document or piece of paper that they're going to have in their file. They don't know how to do them. They consider it more work. And it might be a waste of their time because they think already I've got that information. Why do I need to put it in a timeline? Some will see it as being too simple, and some will think I already know this information. So can you think of anything else? And if everyone can see that slide, or if they can give some feedback, some reason why people don't use it. No? I'm going to keep going then. Run next. Okay. People that know me know I am a fan of Star Wars. Yoda is my favorite. He is very wise. So talking about these timelines, one of the things we want to think about is training ourselves to let go of what we fear to lose. So if it's going to take too much time to do a timeline, take the time to cut that loose and concentrate on the value of what the outcome is from a timeline. Next. It keeps things organized. That's probably the biggest factor that genealogists should use a timeline. Every one of us has that stack of papers, books, and files. Doesn't matter if you're putting your files in a box, they're under the bed in the attic, somewhere at your house repository, or Aunt so-and-so or grandma's house or something. You got to have some method of having it organized. Using a timeline is going to allow you to have things in chronological order. You're going to be able to also document your citations and your resources. And you can share these files with anyone. You can do them in Word and Excel. And I know persons like Thomas McKenty and Cousin Russ, if you're familiar with them, they probably would not use Word. They would probably make a fabulous Excel spreadsheet. And so I'm saying I use Word, and you'll see it in a moment. And it's very simple. You can add columns and things and rows. You also have the beginnings of a biography of your ancestor from the day they're born to the day they die and even after. You're able to see things that could impact or that conflict or things that happen during your ancestor's life. Next. Some more benefits. It's going to be evident that you see conflicts and gaps. If you got a person's age and it goes to the next census and it's 25 years versus around 10 years, then you need to resolve those type things. So it's going to give you hints that will say you need to do something about this and resolve it. And then you got a column that you'll see in a moment that says, what are my next steps? We use this at the Institute because that's the beginning of the research plan. Timelines, again, can be fancy or simple, and the document will always be searchable if you use some type of, Word or Excel type format. Next. This is just a chart that I'm showing that just sets up an overview. It says, what's your goal? What do you know? The typical things like I went through on beginning genealogy or just knowing the system for us to do our research. You want to record events and resources that happen during the time that you're researching that ancestor. And there's going to be gaps, and then you have to figure out what the next steps are. So this chart kind of keeps me focused on when I'm going through somebody's timeline that I have to resolve, or there's more work I have to do. Next. This is one of my favorite things to do at the Institute is to talk with the students about records can create records. So here's an example. So if someone passes away, besides a death certificate, what other records are created? And so I'm asking the membership there to come up with 3 or more things, records that are created from a death record. So you can, if you can say them out, Dave, if you can get someone to say some.
Who's got an idea? Sorry, what? Obituary?
Yes.
Well, military.
Sorry?
Military.
Military records. Anybody else?
Military.
I'm sorry, Nancy, what'd you say? Burial records.
Burial records, great. Burial records, wills are already created, but what's going to happen with them will come after a death certificate. There could be other records. Don't forget coroner records.
Ed, what'd you have?
The census mortality schedule.
There you go. Good one.
Okay.
Good one. So that's just something to keep in our toolbox, that records create a record. So if we ever get challenged on thinking that we're done, and a lot of people think they have finished their ancestor story once a death certificate has came about. Well, I think there's more records that we can look at. So next. Now, I gave you a handout on the so what. This is another one of the drills that we use at the Institute. And it's called so what. It is a way or a tool you can use to analyze a document. So as you're putting information in a timeline, you can question what's there. And that's the so what. You can ask questions of the document. And I know it sounds silly, and I talk to myself all the time when I'm reading over documents, trying to understand, something that's there that doesn't make sense. So I try to figure out, what is it going to do for me? How does it play in me gathering records and resources for my ancestor, to be able to enhance the research and continue? Judy Russell always tells us about knowing what law was in place at the time that you're researching your ancestors. So why was that law created? You know, and so you want to understand again that those records are going to create different records. Next, we're going to look at a death certificate, and I'm going to do a couple so what's. Are they able to see that death certificate okay?
I don't know if we can read it very well. Can you see in the front here? Can you kind of make it out?
Yes.
Okay, so those of you that can see it, this is an example of what so what does, and I'm going to call it out and let you respond back. So I'm looking at this, and this death certificate has lots of information. And the reason I'm going through this is because it also ties into what's going in your timeline. So if I look at this, this is Howard Warden Hart. He died in West Virginia. He's a male, he's colored, and it says he's a widower. I can question that right there and say, so what? He's a widower. But to a researcher, what does that mean? If you see that on a document.
I don't know.
Who was his wife?
Who was he married to?
There you go. Okay, exactly. Then that means who was he married to? When did she die? And etc. Looking over at number 14, it says mother's maiden name. It says Sarah Roper Hart. So I can question that. Well, so what? Okay, so we got his mother's maiden name. What's that going to do for us? And what's next for that? That's a question to you guys.
Is it true?
Her family.
Is it true?
Is Roper her mother's name?
That was is it true? Okay.
Roper is probably her maiden name. So you're going to question, okay, what do I need to do next? I'm going to find out when her and the father got married. Then I'm going to track that whole other line. So questioning the document, just like the father's name or even Howard's middle name, is that a surname? Is it named after someone else in the family? So you're questioning, well, what can I do with that? So what? I've got his middle name. It might be a family name, just like Roper. That's her maiden name. So that means now you can go research the whole Roper line. And of course, you can question anything about the city or the town, you know, where is it located? Because a lot of us are researching people that are not where we live now, but where they maybe have lived 50 to 100 years ago. So next. This death certificate, as an example, is for a Mary C. Marsh, who died in Michigan. So using the so what analysis when you're filling out your timeline, when you're missing information, you should be questioning how to get that information. Because remember, I started off talking about write down everything what you know. So here I can see Mary C. Marsh, which I don't know her middle name. Marsh, according to this, she was married, so we know Marsh is her maiden name. I'm sorry, married name. And then go down and you can look at her birthplace, and it says Virginia. Her father's last name is Goin, Goin. So I think there's a whole bunch I can do with that. I've got to go find Goins in Virginia, which is actually like Johnson and Smith. And also it says the birthplace of the father was Virginia. So that can lead us to do more research. You can even look down at the informant. There's a Matthew Marsh. So I can say, so I got a Marsh. That's a relative. Well, how does he relate to Mary C. Marsh? Is that a child? Is that the husband's brother? So that's another thing that you're going to need to resolve as far as picking apart a death certificate. And if there's missing information, you also want to write down or put on your timeline where you're going to go get that information from. Next. This is an example of the timeline that I used. And I've been using this now for a few years. So you can see the title of it says timeline and 4, date of birth and location, and a spouse. I gave myself some codes to use because I used to handwrite these. Now I do them, on the computer. This is in a Word document. The timeline gives a date, name, age, event, location, resource or a citation, notes or questions, next steps, and date completed. So now basically looking at that, I'm going to just walk through why we got this up. So the things that we want automatically on a timeline are going to be things, of course, birth, marriages, death, wills, any probate. You want to make sure you put the date in the date column. And of course, the person's name you're addressing. If this was Howard, and then when we go to the other slide, you'll see one that I have filled out. You want to also make sure that the state or federal census, each time they come out, is listed on the timeline. So if I was researching my ancestor, and I'm going to say Lawson Goins, he's born in 1807, he dies in 1874. So we know there's going to be census he's going to be in, so I'm going to have rows with the census in them every 10 years. There wasn't a state census, so I won't have those. But when I think about the time he was alive, there was something that happened between 1861 and 1865. I want to record any type of events or activities that happened in that location, in that community where they lived. So between his time frame, I'm going to note the Civil War. That means I'm going to have to learn more about that county and that community. Because did that impact my ancestor? Were they involved at all? So those are questions that comes up. And it could be other community events and activities. Something that might have impacted them, but I want to note. So part of your timeline is also walking through history in that community during the time that your ancestor was alive. Other thing is like putting the dates in. Whatever the date was that's on a document or that you know of, you want to put it in and just use the formal procedure for genealogy, day, month, and year. Or you don't have to, but I just recommend it will be consistent with other documents. And of course, under their name, you want to make sure that you put their full name, including middle, but also note any nicknames that might be there. Each of these rows will expand automatically based on using Excel or Word. So it doesn't matter how much information. As a matter of fact, Lawson Goins, I think I have 34 pages on his timeline. But that's one document, and I have that whole history around him. So also adding the full name, the nicknames, also any notes from oral history that you might have, or anything that you're questioning. You want to put the spelling of their name the way it is on the record. I personally have 12 different spellings for the Goins line. And that's just off of the documents that I have. And that's in official records. Your age, you want to put it the way it is on the document that you're looking at. If you're recording a census, you're putting their age in, right or wrong, because you've got the notes in question column to basically talk to yourself saying these don't add up and what do I have to do to help resolve that? Because we know the census typically are inaccurate, and a lot of that has to come with the census taker and who gave them the information. It could have been the next door neighbor or one of the children in the household that gave the information, and it probably was incorrect. But doing genealogy research, you want to try to resolve those things that don't add up. And that's when you start questioning those things. Because you can't have someone 10 years old in 1860, in 1870, they're 25 years old. Something has to be resolved. that might be that you're looking for more resources. So being able to keep this in chronological order is actually a benefit to us. Now, everybody has the citations and resources that we all use. And I'm going to say you can use the formal way. If you're certified, God bless you. If you just copy and cut from Ancestry and Family Search, that actual citation that they have with the records, God bless you. Long as you get a resource and a citation in that block that you can always go back and pull up a document if you didn't save it. So you want to make sure that you give the right information. Where did you get the document from? Give the date of the document, the page numbers, the volumes, and whatever other information that's cited. Long as you get that in there, it'll make me happy and hopefully you happy. Again, I always think that my adult children or someone's going to come behind me and need to find something or something doesn't add up. So other thing is, I mentioned about putting the census. Don't forget the wars and any type of events. If your ancestor voted at some period, that should be in there. 1891, they voted. If you've got that document. And also anything else in that county or that town that you have read about and you know about during your time frame of during your ancestors' time frame, you want to go ahead and include that as well, because there could be some connections. I do a lot of DAR research as a membership chair in my chapter, so my goal is helping folks with their application going from generation to generation. So the timeline helps to be able to document. And as an example, I'm clearing up a flag, helping to clear up a flag on an ancestor's file that was done back in 1942. They flagged saying that they needed to document the residency. And so I was able to find some town meeting minutes, and I think it was in New London County, Connecticut, to be able to get that flag off, because the town meeting minutes shows that he was present, and I was able to pull everyone that listed the ancestors, being present at that meeting during that time, claiming, the time being located there and associated with them being a patriot. So another thing is looking at the notes and questions. What are your notes? What are your thoughts? What do you question? Is there a gap in some time frame? If you go back, and it probably doesn't matter what era, if it's, colonial period or whatever, think about it. If I have, say, a grandmother and I've got a list of kids, but then I see like a 5 or 7 year gap between births, I'm going to flag that. There was no birth control happening back during those times. So you want to figure out, okay, what does that mean? What are my next steps on that? Well, I'm going to the mortality schedule, just like someone referenced earlier, because it's not going to be typical that a woman did not have a baby every 2 to 3 years. And depending on where they're at and the ages that you're seeing of the kids. So I would probably go look for death records for children that we probably didn't know about. I recently just found a court record that was on Google Books, actually, on an ancestor, and they named the first child of this couple a name we had never heard of, and gave his birth and his death. I would have never known that child even existed if I didn't find the court record. And again, I never expected it to be on Google Books. Also, you want to record oral history into these blocks. And the resource and the citation, you want to date who you talk to, what the relationship is to you and to whoever's timeline you're working on. I personally do the head of the household timelines because I'm also recording all of the children and their marriages. So next. We can go next. I already went through that. One more. One more. One more. There you go. Whoop, go back. There you go. Here's a sample one that I just use as a sample of, with information in it. So 1839, 38 was the estimated time that this Joseph Brand Davis was born. And he's supposed to be the son. So the location of his birth was Chambersburg, Franklin County, Pennsylvania. So the resource and citation that I noted here is the information I received from a baptism record, which I got from the Reorganized Church of the Latter-day Saints out of Michigan. And this was several years ago. And so it stated that he was born in Chambersburg, because we didn't know where he was born. We just knew Pennsylvania. And then I made a note to myself to see the emails on AOL, because I have a Joseph Brand Davis file under my emails. So my notes and questions is also to be able to document that this is actually the birth date and range, even though it was on the baptism record. So was there any announcements? Should I look for the newspaper? He was not born in Philadelphia, as I had heard for probably 40 years, that all of our Davises came out of Philadelphia. And Franklin County just happens to be several counties away, pretty much in the middle of the state of Pennsylvania. And they noted that his mother should be Mildred Brand Davis, born in Richmond. And again, it follows up with a document that I had. If I had completed all of those things, I would have put it in there, a date. And look at 1840 William Davis, and I gave the federal census. So that would be the exact census after his birth for Franklin County. And I noted the census, which I used right from Family Search. There was a household of 10, not sure if this is my William. So again, I'm making my notes in here. There's too many in the household according to what we know. Maybe there's another William Davis family. Was this family colored or not? I need to go look at for my next steps would be looking at other public records, any land records. What about the neighbors and children? And we all know about the fan principle. But you can see that I'm trying to come up with what I have to do next. I also know that he owned land, so I'm going to check the agricultural census as well. Next. So when we're talking about gaps and things like that, did you skip a slide? Go back one. Okay, go back forward. I'm sorry. Okay. Sorry about that, because mine is running different than yours. So if there's a gap or something that you need to resolve, you want to note that you have done that and that you resolved it. Make note that it's corrected, or if you found another document to support a correction, you want to keep your note on it. Again, I think of a timeline being filled out that I could hand it off to somebody, and chronologically, they've got the whole story of this ancestor. And a lot of things that I do is repeat, and I'm sure you guys also do the same thing. We keep looking back at the census, rechecking it, and did we check it, not remembering if we did. And again, this is a way to log that you can go back and say, look, I did so what on the the 1790 census or something like that, or 1800 census, and hopefully this is a tool that would keep you from repeating so much of work that you've already done. So next. Okay. This is showing a timeline actually on Howard Hart. And my goal was to locate his paternal and maternal grandparents. And when we talk about setting goals and things, I like to make them small goals, not big goals. So I wouldn't say, okay, I want to know everything about Howard Hart's grandparents. That's too big. What I want to know is who and locate them. So I want to shrink it down. It's much easier, even like the census, if I use other documents. So we got a 10-year span between the federal population census. Sometimes it's good to shrink that down and say, well, let me look at the next 5 years or look within a 5-year period between the census and see what documents are available instead of the whole 10 years. So looking at this, I'm questioning that who the grandparents are of Howard Hart. I don't know who they are. Then I got notes and questions. Who are they? And what do they have to do with the Ropers? You know, on the maternal side, are they mulattoes or white? I'm from a very mixed background, so a lot of that comes into question because I don't know a lot of times who I'm actually looking for. Next steps, you can see where it's telling me to go. I'm sorry, next step, go back. Then under next step column, that really is the beginning of your research plan. And I mentioned that on a previous slide. But what it's saying is, I got to go look for more information. So really, that's my mapping of the research plan to be able to tackle this goal. I want to know about Massacina Hart and find out who Massacina Hart is actually this Howard Hart's father. And I want to find out where were they at. And of course, I noted there that that was a weird name. So there's so many variations I've seen on the different documents. So I try to stay specific with how the documents record it because that might lead me to something else because the misspelling is always going to be a challenge for us. And I'm also questioning where the Hart slaves, you know, are they near the Roper family? Because now remember on the death certificate, there was a Roper and a Hart last name. So the completed, I located the son and the father, and I noted where I notated them at 1870, 1880, 1900 census, with Benjamin Hart being the father, and he's located in the 1860 and 70. And then it shows that Julia Campbell was the mother. So that's the grandparents of Howard Hart. And then, of course, I drop down. So you can get the gist of that. And again, since I had Massacina, Howard's father, I had to do a little more research in order to find more information on his grandparents. Next. So these are one of the tools, again, that I use at the Institute. And I call it my Murphy's Rule. Is to follow the money, the land, the water, the community, and the faith of the people. And it applies to whoever you're researching. Because the money, if they own land or taxes were paid, if they were free, or if they were white, where they came in from, money is going to be floating around somewhere. So you want to know if there's any documents that shows some transactions. The land, again, you're looking location, you're looking for paying property taxes. If your ancestors were migrating at all, just don't forget to follow the water, the trails out of that county. The community, same thing as I mentioned about noting what happened in the community. You want to know, was your family Quakers? Were they Methodists? You got to look for the faith of the people because those were also migrations. We all can do this. And again, it's just one of those rules I like to tell people to keep in mind. Next. Next thing is one of my favorites. This is James Dent Walker's Rule of Three. James Dent Walker was the founder. He worked at the National Archives back in the 70s. And he had a rule of three. He would basically tell researchers that, you know, if you're going to say something, then prove it by showing three things to back it up. So in this example, you say that Parley Warden's born in New York about 1795 to 1800. He died in 1852. That his father is Arnold Warden, born 1763 in Connecticut. He died in 1840 in New York. Then again, Mr. Walker's rule would say, show me 3 things to back it up. So an example, 3 records could be birth, death, and marriage. But you know the challenges of that time frame that these folks were born and when they died. So being able to get birth record, as an example, haven't found one on Parley yet. So I'm building off of other documents that will get me back to that range of 1795 to 1800. So I question you, what if those 3 records, birth, death, or marriage, aren't available? What other record or document could you locate to support a father-son relationship? So those in the front row, if you're there, to be able to give some suggestions.
We've got the will.
Will,
Anybody else?
Probate.
Probate.
probate,
Military.
yes. Pension records is another one that you could look at. It could be notating, you know, somebody's relationship or describing, and you know, some relationship. And this is one of my challenges because I haven't been able to locate a birth record on Parley, and I am building a good argument for DAR that this is father-son. We in the family know it, but I got to get it through that DAR understands it. So next. So just want to recap. Timelines are a valuable tool. There's no magic in genealogy. You got to know those basics. Get some good guides, a couple good books that are your go-tos that you can use to get you back to the basics. Anytime I hit a brick wall or have some type of challenge, I go back to the very basics of genealogy, like we covered up in the front of the presentation here. Again, there's no magic in what we do. It is really turning the pages and digging for records and resources. I always recommend folks join local groups, tune into webinars like these, attend conferences and institutes. And always take the time to ask others that's doing it. It could be others that are researching in the same area. Social media, as in Facebook, has just been really a powerful tool for a lot of us because people have set up pages on the certain counties, and or they'll call it a genealogy Facebook page for a certain county. So those are avenues that we can take that we didn't have 20 years ago. And they're really becoming a gold mine because you never know who comes and likes that page might be researching in the same community that you're researching. You want to ask, again, questions to those who have done it. Other resources, it could be dissertations, it could be the quarterly manuals that come out, it could be the family tree type magazine, you know, where you're getting your information. A lot of times reading a book on what someone else has already done gives you tips on things that you should question and go see if it applies also to where you're researching. We want to do the so what. We want to analyze, question. I'd like to go through each cell on a document or each block, like on a death certificate, and figure out how that's pertaining. You can call it so what, you can call it just questioning, because it's really the art of questions and what can I get next to help support whatever my goal is. Next. Dave. Oh, there you go. So my last little question to you is, you know, if you do a timeline, you think about it. We walk through it. You know, you're going to have a working document. What can you do with a timeline if you have one? And that's just something to think about. Next. And I go back to my favorite person about timelines. Do or do not. There is no try. I like Yoda's thought process on this because I think having everything in one document in chronological order, and you can back it up 100 times, doesn't matter because it's a document. And you can share it with people easy. I think it's just worth giving it a try. So the next slide just says if there's any questions, I'm open to answering them. And I thank you.
Okay, I have a microphone that will allow anybody to ask. Oh, I got a hand out in the back here already. Do you want me? Should I shut this off so you can see us?
It's up to you. That's good.
All right. You know what? I'm going to leave it right there because well, it's a long story. We're trying to record everything here on YouTube.
Okay. And there's my contact information if anybody wants to contact me.
Okay. First up is Ed Strickland.
Mine is not so much a question, but a comment for inclusions on timelines are boundary changes. You'll find that over different records, people are going to show up in the same place that may have they never moved. And related to that is parent town for villages. And another one is organization of churches. When the church was organized, that may explain why there appears to be a relocation of the person. Is that just moved? There's a new church that's closer to them in the same denomination.
Absolutely. It's a great point. And also think about the cemeteries that are in a community or associated, with the church and locations. And I think it's another thing to record. It's a location. It could even be the GPS as far as directions to, and I'm going to say cemeteries or churches, but absolutely dealing with the boundaries, because I do a lot of research in Jefferson County. Well, when it was Virginia, but June 20th, 1863, it became West Virginia. All of my research is when it was Virginia. And I've run up against right now is that Virginia says, no, West Virginia has the record. West Virginia says, no, Virginia has the record. So I'm toggling, looking for a marriage record where I find others that have marriage records that are dated like the day before they became West Virginia, but each state has crossed me back. I need to make reference to that. That when they became West Virginia, where did those records go? Just like you were saying, as far as boundaries. So great comment.
As a matter of fact, to Ed's point, we're standing here in Agawam, Massachusetts, which was originally in the Connecticut colony, right? Late 17th century. And on top of that, we're sitting in Hampshire County, or at least it was until 1812. So those kinds of things get shifted.
Yeah, and you want to resolve that. You want to make note of that as well. So being able to log that in notes and questions is important, because you're going to go back to that several times. Loudoun County, Virginia is another thing. It became Loudoun County in 1757. Well, I'm back in the 1740s, so now I need to go to Fairfax County.
Who else has a question? Well, I'm going to admit something here tonight, Shelley, because this was a very, very good, intelligent, and brilliant presentation. I'm going to admit that you and I are cousins, and let everybody know.
I think we are.
I wasn't going to admit that. No, I'm kidding.
I'll admit it. I'll claim you. I will say, because I actually relate to a lot of folks on Facebook and a lot of, say, presidents and, Mayflower people and things. But you know what? My folks came into this country on different lines in the early 1600s. They were in New York, Connecticut, Rhode Island, and Massachusetts. I'm going to relate to everybody pretty much. And so it's really been interesting going down this journey and joining like DAR and things like that, because it's just enhancing what I do and hopefully what we do at the Institute. So.
Well, thank you very much. It's been a great night. We're so happy that you're able to come into our little room here and share your knowledge and expertise. Everybody?
Thank you. Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.